We are really privileged to have Loyd Auerbach with us today. Loyd has been around the field of paranormal investigations and parapsychology since the 1970s. He has been the voice of paranormal investigation since the original Ghostbusters movie came out, and he's been doing research in this area from even before then. Loyd has done numerous TV appearances, has done many radio shows. He is truly the preeminent expert in this area that I know of, and very much, I think within the field, I don't think there's anyone who has done more work in this area than Loyd has. He's written a number of books. If he doesn't tell you about them, he's also a teacher at the Rhine Education Center, and he's going to be teaching 2 courses coming up in August. One of them being, we're going to co-teach a course on the ethics of paranormal investigations, and the other is how to choose a psychic. Really interesting topics, very diverse, and thank you for being here, Loyd.
Thank you, John. Well, in this next, I guess, half an hour or so, 35 minutes or so, I'm going to try to collapse what we cover in a lot of our classes at the Rhine Center into just one quick overview session to kind of give you an introduction. So first, my favorite quote, and all my students see this, science fiction writer Kathleen Sky: "There's no such thing as the supernatural. There are only things we don't understand yet." I think that's just simply a key statement for science in general. Okay, so the title of this is Paranormal Investigations, and I'm going to get to what that actually means for us, but contrary to the reality shows, because unfortunately the paranormal TV shows, the reality shows have created, on the negative, some real misconceptions. On the positive, it's brought a lot more people to, I guess you could say, to the playground to play with it. We just want to make sure that they know what they're doing. So the paranormal as a term is much more than ghosts and hauntings. It has been applied, of course, beyond psychic phenomena to also include things that are unexplained. We deal mainly with investigations with apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists. I'll get into that in a bit, but those are psychic or psi experiences. And there's a big disconnect with the paranormal reality shows that they seem to think on the shows, or at least they put out the idea, that these are not connected to ESP or connected to psychokinesis. So all 3 of these fall under spontaneous psi experiences. All of them start out with a human witness or an experiencer, if we're going to investigate, and I'll explain why that is. Unlike the TV shows, there is no technology that can detect psi phenomena, that can detect ghosts. No matter what they say on TV, there's nothing that we have for sure that can detect apparitions. So technology is absolutely secondary to human experience. And also we never, well, I should say, we almost never investigate in the dark. It would have to be that rare case where people are only having an experience when all the lights are out and it's the middle of the night. And the thing that really always gets me, and I've been on panels at some of the ghost conferences, the ghost hunter conferences, where some folks from TV will say that there's nothing beyond the 1990s. There's over 140 years of scientific investigation of these things. And most ghost hunters, many people who follow the TV shows are totally unaware of this. So why do we investigate? Well, we investigate anything to solve a mystery in some respects, but from a scientific perspective, we're trying to gather data to understand a particular phenomenon or a group of phenomena. We want to understand and eliminate the normal explanations when we do investigations and research. We want to be able to form questions, hypotheses, and if possible, test them much harder in the field than it is in the laboratory. We want to replicate the work of other researchers, certainly in the laboratory and controlled research. Again, tougher to do in a field investigation where you are not in control of the environment. We do want to increase our knowledge in general of the phenomena and the experiences. And of course, this is something I'll talk about at the very end. We want to help the experiencers when they are asking for help. Of course, there are a lot of folks who just simply want to go out and have an experience of their own, and that's okay as long as you are keeping other things in mind. So I mentioned that we're dealing with spontaneous psi experiences. And of course, these are psychic phenomena or experiences that happen beyond the controlled conditions that you find in a laboratory. So They also are typically the uncontrolled experiences of normal people. We call those spontaneous, but in many respects, when a psychic or medium does something, we still consider that a spontaneous psi experience, even though they are in control and a conscious control, because it's not under controlled conditions. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but when we talk about field work or field research or experiences we can look at outside the laboratory, it is all of these. We don't investigate necessarily all of these. We may get reports of all of them and work with people or inform them about all of these and what we've learned over the years, both from working with people's spontaneous experiences and from laboratory findings. But these are all on the continuum of psychic experiences or psi experiences. On the recurrent front, which is what we want to look at, we want to look at not just one-time experiences, but the recurrent experiences. We're dealing with our big three, the apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists. That's our typical paranormal investigations. However, one can also be a field investigator looking at cases of the reincarnation type, such as what Jim Tucker does and others, and Jim Matlock and others have done, working with children who remember previous lives. I personally have been involved in a number of investigations of the claimed abilities of various psychics and mediums, some of which have turned out to be genuine, and unfortunately, some of which have turned out to be absolute frauds. In some instances, not even good frauds. So we are really looking at the experiences and the reports, and reports are important, of people, even in the cases where it seems the phenomena exists on its own. And what that means is, if you have a situation where there is truly an apparition, a conscious person without their body, so someone who has survived the death of their body, they exist on their own. We don't need any witnesses. But in order for us to investigate, unless the apparition happened to come into contact me directly, which has not happened yet, we have to have the experiences of witnesses. We have to have reports from witnesses. So we can't deal directly with the phenomena unless it becomes evident to us directly. So let's take a look at these three different things that we're dealing with here. One of them is hauntings. Now on TV, you'll hear this referred to as residual hauntings. And psychics talk about imprints. They talk about psychic residue. The term place memory is an old term that we've been using again since probably around the late 1990s. And I think it actually really encapsulates what we're dealing with most of the time. It's as if the location, or sometimes an object, because it can be an object, seems to hold information about its history, possibly recent history, possibly older history. And how we as witnesses, as experiencers pick this up would either be through a form of clairvoyance, ESP, essentially, of the location or of the object and its history. Or, there's always a possibility that there is something going on in the physical environment that can eventually be understood from a current physics perspective, and the human brain and how it's picking up information from the environment. So we have to consider that as a possibility. It may not be purely a psychic thing, even though it's still a function of consciousness in that sense. One of the ways to look at this is if you know of the phenomena or the ability of psychometry, which is something that psychics have talked about for hundreds of years, the idea that you can touch or hold an object and pick up information about where that object's been, who its owner is, that sort of thing. It's history, essentially. And it's actually not too hard for people to learn this. I've taught a number of my students to do this. I've done it on occasion myself. I know psychics, really good psychics, who've been able to do this very well and work with police over the years. So if you think about psychometry, picking up information from something about that object, something about that thing, when you're in a house, you're picking up information from that house. That's a form of psychometry. That's a form of clairvoyance or ESP in general. So the thing to remember, and this is an important distinction between this and apparitions, and that is that while pop culture tells us that something terrible must have happened in this location, a suicide, a murder, a knockdown, drag out fight, a massacre, a battle, something like that. So it seems to relate to death. That's not the case. It's the living, perhaps in the process of dying, perhaps not, but it's the living who leave the impressions behind. And those living people of us who are witnesses, we come along, we pick up the information. We might pick it up visually. We might pick it up auditorily. We might feel something. In other words, we process the information. The perception of the information is processed as if it's similar or as if it is a sensory experience, when in fact it's an extra or non-sensory experience, bit of information. Now, when I really want to distance this from death for a couple of reasons. One, because you can pick up information, whether it's in a haunted house or on an object using psychometry, from the previous owner, or even the current owner. That person's alive. People have reported seeing and hearing things related to living people, even to themselves, over the years. And to give you a really good understanding of this, and this is the way I've had to explain this to some of the ghost hunters out there, I can watch movies from the 1930s. Now, those movies were made when those people were alive. No one in that film, when it was made, had died, unless they had died before the film was released. But when they are actually filming, they were all alive. Decades later, they're all dead. They're all deceased. I can still watch that movie. So I am watching a recording of living people from the 1930s. Think of a haunting that way. It's a recording of an event that might have been a week ago, or 50 years ago, or much longer than that. We pick it up, we become the playback, we become the projector, we become the DVD player, and so on. We become living YouTube, you might say. The term apparition actually goes back to the 19th century in common usage in the field of psychical research. And while ghost can almost be used interchangeably, and you'll see that, I might mention that, use that term a number of times, because most people seem to think of ghosts as a spirit of someone who used to live. That's actually not how that term is always used. But when we're talking about apparitions, think of an apparition, a ghost, as that which is perceived. And it's always important to remember there's a difference between perception and what our senses pick up. So I perceive, not with my eyes, not with my ears. I don't sense, I perceive information that relates to and allows me to see or seemingly see or hear or feel or smell something that apparently interacts. It seems to be related to some part of the human personality, whether you want to call that mind or soul or spirit, that can, again, somehow exist in our physical universe after the death of that person's body. But also, because we have a category of apparitions, of living apparitions, potentially that apparition is someone who is projected outside their body. So perhaps they have had an out-of-body experience or are having an out-of-body experience, and they travel somewhere and somebody sees them. That's an apparition of the living. We focus on apparitions in our investigations of humans, but reports do come in of animals, especially pets. We always have to remember here, though, it's really important that we consider there are two sides to what's going on psychically using psi. There is the apparition, and there is you, the witness. You are receiving information, which then plays back in some way. You perceive in a visual, auditory, in some way. And not everybody perceives apparitions the same way, even in the same case. So you perceive this. How are you getting that information? That apparition doesn't have a physical form to reflect or give off light. So your eyes are not picking that thing, that person up. They do not have vocal cords in which to make or move, to make sound, to move the air, to create a physical sound. So it's all, think of it as a psychic, bit of psychic information. So you are being psychic. You are using psi, consciously, unconsciously, to perceive that apparition. And that apparition is using psi. They don't have a body. They don't have physical senses. They're using psi to actually interact. I mean, if you were dead and you didn't have a physical body, you have no eyes to see, how do you see the world? Well, you'd have to be using something that is non-sensory. It's still perception, but it's non-sensory, and we would call that ESP. And then if they actually move an object, that is psychokinesis. That is mind over matter, whether it's a human being who's alive who does it or a human being who's deceased who does it. When we compare the two, and this is a kind of a key thing when we're doing investigations, we have to do this in any investigation where there is a human figure seen, for example. First, we consider apparitions as consciousness. Because of that, when an apparition is of someone whose personality or is survived the death of their body, we see this as evidence for survival of bodily death. Of course, it can be interpreted from a super ESP perspective, from a purely materialist perspective, but it can be applied as evidence for survival. Apparitions, again, can be of deceased people or living individuals, either one. They are typically, and that should be a not, are not typically repetitive or acting in a pattern. Although I can't rule that out because, it's possible that the apparition is somebody when they were alive that had OCD, so that they are repeating themselves over and over and over again. But that's really rare. All right, hauntings, again, thinking of them as recordings, are seemingly location or object bound where apparitions are not. While apparitions tend to stick in one location, that's based on the person who the apparition represents. They tend to go to a place that was associated with them when they were alive, whether it is back to their home, to their family, to the bar or restaurant they used to frequent, to the hotel they worked at, to the aircraft carrier that they had real fond memories of. But they tend to stick around one location, but they certainly are not stuck there, whereas hauntings are location bound because it's related to the information in the environment. Hauntings cannot be applied to evidence for survival any more than that 1930s movie can be applied as evidence for survival of the people in that film. Hauntings can be of deceased or of living people or of recent activity or older activity. But again, the activity happened when they were alive. And there are hauntings where they do relate to a battle or they do relate to a murder or something like that. But the recording tends to end when that person has died. You don't see a recording, a haunting of a dead body. So here we're looking for the difference being, because hauntings are repetitive, they tend to have a pattern. We're looking for interactivity versus repetition. Poltergeist phenomena, or recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, it happens again and again. It is spontaneous or uncontrolled, and it is mind over matter. That is related to living agent PK. So we tend to look at activity in cases, and poltergeist cases are all about physical activity, that this relates to a living person in the environment, or perhaps to the psychology of a group, of a family. The model is itself, the RSPK model goes back to 1958, and a case in Long Island that William Roll and J.G. Pratt did. And although there are much earlier roots, there are kind of writings and murmurings from Nandor Fodor and others in the early part of the 20th century about this idea. And there have been hypotheses that have been tested in cases to get the phenomena to stop or determine who might be at the center of the poltergeist case. So you might want to take a look at the work of Bill Roll, Tony Cornell, Scott Rogo, and definitely Nandor Fodor. So one thing I learned over the last few years, purely by accident, conversing on email with a couple of folks in the UK, is that the term poltergeist, it seems in the US, we kind of follow the Bill Roll model, but I've known people in the UK, as I learned from Guy Lyon Playfair a number of years ago, where the term poltergeist refers to any case where there's physical activity, and then they might break it out when they determine that there might be an apparition there versus it's a living agent. Whereas we use that term to start with living agent situations, and with apparitions a little different. So let's take a look at that particular thing. So this comparison, poltergeist cases, when we use that term, they're typically physical activity only. They're missing apparitional sightings, and when there are figures seen, they tend to be archetypal or dreamlike, not representing actual people. They generally connect to a living person in the situation. So you can play detective and figure out who's at the center of all this. Although again, it could be the psychology of a family that's involved. They're generally very chaotic. When I say the activity in the cases is chaotic. It doesn't really follow a rhyme or reason, although the types of items that move or the kind of phenomena that's happening may relate to that living person, to that poltergeist agent, to that person's psychology. Whereas apparitions, they can occasionally include physical activity, but apparitional PK tends to be very purposeful, non-chaotic, a little playful in some respects. It can get chaotic if, and I've seen this in the literature and in cases I've even had, where the people are absolutely purposely ignoring the apparition because they don't want to believe he or she exists, and that apparition gets a little upset and throws a temper tantrum. Usually stops almost immediately as soon as they pay attention. They're generally independent of whether anyone is living there or working there or even present. So we have this kind of distinction between these cases. Now, we focus on the high impact experiences in most of our investigations. I have not had reports of children remembering previous lives. It is not my specialty. I'd be very happy to get involved in investigating those, but I would tend to refer those out to the specialists in our field. But again, with these three, with apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists, you do want to remember that even though there's an apparition there, there is the ESP or psi of the witnesses. With hauntings, there's possibly an imprint in the environment, but there is the ability of the witnesses to pick up the information. And poltergeists are all about living agents. So all of these involve psi abilities. And when I've heard at some of the conferences that I used to go to, the ghost conferences, or seen some things posted on the web or on social media that ghost hunters don't need to know anything about ESP, that's absurd because these things do not exist in a vacuum. So what do we investigate? Well, we definitely investigate witness reports and experiences, provided they're not one-offs and they didn't happen like a year or two or longer ago. I've had people report to me that they want an investigation or call me and they want an investigation. Here's what happened in our house 5 years ago. Can you come out? We just found out about you. And the answer to that is, what's the point? If nothing has happened in the last 5 years, I'm happy to take their experience to get the report and talk to them about what might have happened. But think of it as the ultimate cold case that happened in Crime Alley, where there have been many other crimes that happened since then. There's not even any evidence you can get other than the witness testimony, which you don't need to get on site. I've even had people call me about their ghost experiences after they've moved 3 times. So we might investigate a case based on rumor or local folklore if there's enough indication that there truly are firsthand accounts that were taken down. So there could be a story about a location, a restaurant or a place, and you do a little research and you find out, hey, people did write about this, people did put in their firsthand experiences, people were interviewed for the newspaper. That might make it worthwhile, but it's pretty rare. And we do not investigate spooky old buildings that have neither one of those. However, I know a lot of ghost hunting groups that love that. So the most common steps for basic field investigation are pretty simple. We interview, and we interview extensively. Interviewing is the best skill you can come up with for doing investigations. So that means asking questions and listening and asking more questions. But we may have surveys and such. You try to confirm the statements, including talking to other witnesses, but you do try to rule out fraud and lying, and you want to find out what their motivations are even for reporting. If a site visit's appropriate, you want to think about the potential for alternative sources of the experiences before you go, and then you absolutely want to look for those when you're there. You want to totally observe and thoroughly look at the location and the people themselves, and you may be doing historical and other background research if the type of case refers to that or relates to that. You draw your conclusions, and then hopefully you help the clients where help is requested. And all along this, you're gathering data, of course. The basic tools, you have a report intake, you have interviewing. Again, that's in bold because it's really important. We might use surveys and polls in investigations. We might do records research. We certainly do site visits. We're doing a lot of problem solving in a lot of these cases. And I have to be honest, in all the cases I've had, I have yet to have a case where everything reported was related to the apparition, the haunting, or the poltergeist. Individual events or activities that are reported need to be looked at individually, because many of what people report in these cases, especially when they're on edge or freaked out, they have alternate explanations. the people immediately label them as paranormal because they've had a genuine or seemingly genuine experience to begin with. We do use tools to measure the environment. We do not use tools to measure the ghosts or to communicate in that way. We use tools to look for correlations in the physical environment, not just to the paranormal, but also to alternative explanations. So it helps to have a broad knowledge of possible explanations, including fraud. That's one of the things the course that John mentioned, the How to Choose a Psychic, we'll be talking about psychic fraud in that class as well. And in fact, working with psychics and mediums and investigations. It is really important to have an understanding of the field of parapsychology and laboratory findings, because what we're doing is applying the knowledge and the findings of laboratory work to the field and vice versa. And it also is important to know that it helps to have some counseling skills without acting as a counselor or therapist if you're not legally able to do that, but you want to be able to give referrals to people to help them. So from the perspective of parapsychology, from psychical research, we're studying the experiences and we're studying what's behind the experiences as far as psi or the paranormal is concerned. We want to look past the labels that people use. If they call it a demon, you got to look past that and see what might really be going on. People use all sorts of labels, especially today because of popular culture, and we have to figure out what lies below them. And we always have to remember that things are not always paranormal, even though they seem that way, because people make perceptual mistakes. They make conceptual mistakes, meaning they did not have the knowledge base to come to the correct conclusion about what's actually going on, even though it's not paranormal. So we must eliminate all the non-psi sources and causes because we're trying to study something, and you can't study it if you don't get rid of all the crap that's there. So this can include all sorts of explanations. This is not even a full list, by the way. I think the main thing is mistaken perceptions, mistaken conclusions. I am trained as a magician and mentalist. I do perform professionally as a mentalist and am heavily involved in the Psychic Entertainers Association. What I've learned, my background, which only started, by the way, in my parapsychology education, that's given me an understanding of how easy it is for people to make mistakes in their conclusion about what's going on. And I'm not talking about with magicians performing or mentalists, just in general. It's really interesting how people work that way. And it really gives you an insight into how people remember things too. We have to know something about environmental conditions, because environmental conditions can easily cause mistaken conclusions and bad perceptions. We have to look at things that are physiologically related, like sleep paralysis. Psychological issues are certainly there. There's witness bias in testimony, memory involved in testimony. And there can be medical issues, neurological issues specifically. We always have to consider drugs and alcohol, although when you have a group of people who are having an experience, if they truly are each individually having those experiences, that's less likely an issue. Same with the medical and neurological issues, but environmental is definitely potential there. And we have to ask their motivations, because motivations do lead to fraudulent reports. I have had people who have actually opened up it right off the bat and said, like, what do you want? I say, what do you want to get out of this case? Do you want help? Do you want a phenomena to stop? No, we're going to sell this as a screenplay to such and such a movie company. That's a case I'm not going on. It's very unlikely to be real. And then there is just out and out psychic fraud, or those people who pretend to be psychic who have actually created more of a problem. And I have to say that included in that, I would include some of the ghost hunters who are out there who may be unintentionally creating problems, but because they have a lack of knowledge, but are professing knowledge that they do not have, or expertise that they do not have, they have often created more problems for the families than solutions. All right, now we do have truly an ethical conundrum. How do we help people asking for help while getting as much data and testing hypotheses where we can? And the problem here is, I want to know what the phenomena is. I want to gather as much as I can. But these people have called me and are saying, we're traumatized, we're upset, we need help. And that becomes an issue. And frankly, if you do take our ethics class, you'll learn that I think it's most important to do what doctors do, which is to do no harm. I'm a firm believer in that. I am part of a panel on next Friday on a poltergeist case that we had here in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley that was totally worked through virtually because of the pandemic. I think you'll find that session really interesting, especially the part about how we handle this therapeutically as well. So remember that spontaneous experiences do provide the who, what, when, where, and how, under what particular conditions things happen, maybe even hints to the why. You can get that from cases as well, why these are happening. Certainly you can get that. And these are all observations of psi in the wild. So spontaneous stuff helps us identify patterns which can suggest research hypotheses, perhaps not with apparitions, but certainly in other ways. We have yet to get an apparition to volunteer to be in the laboratory on a regular basis and got no way to hold them to a schedule. So we do get ideas about what can be researched. And in fact, most of the research on ESP and psychokinesis comes from initially reports that people have had of having these experiences. But then what you find, what you learn from the conclusions, the findings in the laboratory actually can be applied back to understanding spontaneous psi, to these experiences. Certainly the experiences of the witnesses, even if we can't apply them always to the apparitions or the haunting phenomena itself. So to sum up, so I think I've hit my half-hour mark. Remember to learn as much as you can. If you've been sitting through this all day, you have learned quite a bit. If you sit through the conference, you will learn quite a bit more. But definitely delve into what the field has done, not just the laboratory work, but also the field work that folks have done, and get an idea of the spread of even opinions and perspectives on the phenomena, these field phenomena, from folks within the field, because we don't all agree on the same thing. I mean, what I'm putting out today is general, but honestly, there are folks, some of my colleagues, who don't agree with me on everything. And that is normal within the process of science. You want that kind of discourse, and it should be friendly, not what we see with the ghost hunter groups quite a bit. We want to apply the science. We want to apply the findings. So I do applied science. When I do a so-called scientific investigation, which is a big thing for ghost hunters, it seems, really what I'm doing is applying the science, because you can't really work the total scientific method into every investigation. You are really being a detective here, and you really do want to be helpful as much as possible. Okay, so last thing I just want to mention is every other Sunday I do something on Facebook Live called Ask Professor Paranormal, and people feed me questions and I just spend the hour answering questions. So my next one is tomorrow night, Sunday the 18th. It's 8:30 Eastern time, 5:30 Pacific time, goes for an hour. You'll find it on facebook.com, The Live Paranormal. And if you follow me on Twitter, you will see an announcement, or Facebook for that matter, you'll see an announcement about that. I'll be posting something tomorrow just to confirm that. You can always contact me through my email there. Please do consider taking some of the courses at the Rhine Center. We have great courses and a great group of people who are teaching them. And I mentioned the Forever Family Foundation in my first slide. This is an organization that supports the work of spirit mediums in the family grieving process, but also supports the research of scientists who are doing work looking at survival of bodily death. I'm very proud to be president of the foundation, in fact. You can join that one for free. And these are my books. The one in the middle is a novel, and we have our second one coming out in a couple of months.
Let's keep that slide up for a second. You are a prolific writer. I know each book will call to a person based on where they're at, what they need, but in general, where should people start? Your first book or your last book?
I think it really depends on what they're interested in. The ghost hunting and the hauntings and poltergeist books, which are just the rite of near death, those are very, very basic. They're written in a house style. The publisher wanted me to write them in a very simplistic style. Not that my other books are hard to understand at all. If you understood me speaking, you'll understand my books. But those give you kind of an encapsulation of basics of things. So you might start there if that's your interest. If you have an interest in how parapsychologists or how a parapsychologist like me would work with a medium or psychic in an investigation, then take a look at the Ghost Detective's Guide to Haunted San Francisco, which I co-authored with my late investigations partner, Annette Martin, a phenomenal psychic and medium. And we've been told by people that they feel like they're on the investigation with us when they read what's in that book. ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists was my first book. Reprinted it in 2016, the 30th anniversary. So if you really want a good overview, that's like the best book to start with. But the others are niche products, you might say. Reincarnation, channeling, possession covers those topics. So mediumship is part of that. But the channeling phenomena of the 70s and 80s and 90s is a focus, along with reincarnation research and approach to possession, which is a little different than what you'll see from others in the world of pop culture. Mind Over Matter covers psychokinesis extensively, and psychic dreaming covers that topic extensively. And finally, if you were interested in the psychic spying world, ESP Wars, which was co-authored by Ed May, who was the program director for about 10 years of the Stargate program, the remote viewing program. Victor Rubel, Joe McMonigal was one of the main viewers for that project, and myself. And we have contributions, the only book on the remote viewing espionage programs that has significant information directly from the Russians and former Soviets. In fact, the foreword is written by Nikolai Sham, who was, before the fall of the Berlin Wall, the deputy director of the KGB. If you like KGB stuff, that's cool. That book is cool for that too.
Thank you very much. And so for those that there's questions about books on this topic, well, look, you have a slide here full of several books. He mentioned, Loyd mentioned where you could start, ghost huntings or huntings and poltergeist. He talked, he was passionate about the Ghost Detectives, the one with the San Francisco Bridge there, the Golden Gate Bridge, I think that's what we're looking at. And so there's some books. And then there's a Facebook Live with Loyd tomorrow on July 18th. So if you're looking more about where do I study, because there's questions, but I want to learn more about this, then check out his Facebook Live. And then Loyd, I'm going to just share you said you're part of a group on Friday. So during the conference on Friday, July 18th, which is your topic? Do you know? Because we don't have the name.
Later in the day. So keep going. That's the virtually facilitated investigation of ostensible RSPK disturbances during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Perfect. So you'll be in the main room. So I'll be one of the moderators. So that's happening on Friday, July 30th. And that's the one we close with on Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is the start time, which makes it 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we got John here to help us moderate some questions. Thanks again, Loyd. And thank you guys for your questions. John, did you see any questions you wanted to ask off the bat?
I always have a lot of questions for Loyd.
This is true.
Yes. So, one of the ongoing themes, through the questions all day long is, how do I learn about this? How can I get a degree? How can I become a professional in this area? And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your path and how you got into the field. And I mean, it's diverse and it's a little different, but giving some people a sense of it, I think.
Yeah, I will say that my path is going to be different than what you can do today, some of it anyway. But I will also say that the universe was kind to me with timing. So my interest started as a kind of a preteen in many respects. And in my high school days, I grew up outside of New York City, and I had a couple friends, and as it turned out, I had a couple teachers, and we were able to start a parapsychology club in my high school in Elmsford, New York. I lived near enough to Montague Ullman and Gertrude Schmeidler that through a neighbor of mine who knew Monty was able to introduce me as a teenager. I got to meet Hans Holzer at his apartment because my uncle, who was a radio newscaster in New York, had interviewed him. So I had a lot of connection, let's put it that way. In fact, I did my first radio show as a teenager. Some older people might remember the Long John Neville show. He was a famous he was the Art Bell of the 60s and 70s, essentially. And then I got some good advice. I wrote to J.B. Ryan, and he wrote back. He actually sent us a letter that helped us get that club going, that parapsychology club. But I wrote to him. I talked to Montague Ullman and Gertrude Schmeidler about the path. And everyone I talked to said, learn as much as you can about the field. At that point, there was no degree program in parapsychology. Just realize you're going to get a degree in some other field of science. And psychology was certainly a very popular one with a PA, but physics and anthropology were also possibilities. And I was very interested in astrophysics, actually. I ended up at Northwestern University. I know the person who spoke before me, Simonon, talked about UFO abductions. I was in the astronomy department with J. Allen Hynek in my freshman year. In fact, I actually, not related to parapsychology, but I actually volunteered at the Center for UFO Studies in Hynek's house, in his attic in Evanston, Illinois. But I'll be very, very blunt and honest and say the math killed me in the physics. So I switched to anthropology, which actually was a very smart thing for me to do. Partly, again, timing wise, I ended up with an advisor who actually subscribed to the Journal of Parapsychology. That was a bizarre thing. But Northwestern had a lot of classes on magical and supernatural beliefs. So the anthropology of religion, magic, and the supernatural is a really good focal point in cultural anthropology. In fact, I think it's a great way to learn about the spread of beliefs around the world, which really helped me a lot in investigations when I'm dealing with people of different religious backgrounds or different cultural backgrounds. It's been incredible helping me there. I lucked out. Again, my senior year of college, John Bisaha and Brenda Dunn were doing a mini series at Mundelein College in Chicago on parapsychology, at which I took that mini series. I met Ramakrishna Rao, who then told me about the JFK parapsychology program, which had just started. So I ended up being one of the fortunate few who got a master's in parapsychology from John F. Kennedy University, which this year has been merged into National University. That doesn't exist anymore. And our program kind of ended because of finances and politics within the university in the late 80s. In fact, the Office of Paranormal Investigations would not have existed if the parapsychology program had continued. We actually were an outgrowth of that, a need that was filled because the program went away. So for most people today, I'd say the advice that I was given, get a degree, study in a subject that interests you, that might have some career possibilities also, and consider where you can find those professors, find those folks who can at least not object to you doing anything related to parapsychology, who might be either encouraging or provide another path for really looking at this. But also join the Parapsychological Association and the SSE and connect with people. That's really important. Now we have the Ryan Education Center courses, which are a great path to get that background, real deep knowledge of parapsychology without an academic degree. So that's a pathway in. And there are, of course, other people who provide courses as well.
Yes, it's really, because there are no degree programs that are strictly parapsychology degree. I mean, you can take courses with Christine Simmons Moore at West Georgia,
Right.
which is wonderful. Saybrook University has some opportunities as well, but they're not actually degrees in parapsychology. And similar to what I've done, I studied psychology, research, and analysis, but I also, on my own, did all the study I could related to parapsychology and integrated it into my psychology degree. But I had to do that on my own. That's kind of the way it works in this field. And Loyd, I think your path really illustrates that there are so many varieties of ways to go through this.
Well, and remember that the United Kingdom actually has a bunch of universities, colleges that do have either anomalous psychology or parapsychology courses and coursework, and some great people teaching too.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add to that because in my clinical practice, I have my regulated designation that allows me to see clients and patients, even maybe bill insurance. And then I follow my passion in things for certificates and diplomas that are not recognized by insurance, that are not recognized by mainstream, but I bring it into my practice. So what I'm hearing is you got to play, you're in Rome, so you got to play by the rules. If you want to see people and bill insurance or be a little bit taken seriously, do the mainstream that you can, and then start to follow your passion. And there's unlimited courses out there. They may not be recognized as as medical or in our domain, but the people that you'll attract will appreciate it, and you'll be doing what you love. So every day will be great.
Agreed.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. So, Lloyd, you know about Bothell House, the poltergeist case?
Yeah.
Yes, there's a question. How were you involved with that case at all?
Not directly. I was contacted by him, I don't even remember how many years ago, many years ago, when it was first starting. And Neil McNeil, who is a former student of mine and teaches parapsychology adult ed courses continuing ed courses in the Seattle area, did an investigation of the place. And I knew some others who were actually there, and Demon House it is not. So that's all I can say about it. Poltergeist house, yes, potentially. Although
So should people be afraid of ghosts?
all right, so here, my personal feeling, and this is folks I work with, is you have less to fear of the dead than you ever do of the living. I have never been in a situation, even with those situations where people have had problems with the apparition that's appearing, never felt afraid of anything like that. The thing to remember is that we as living beings have more power than someone who's deceased. That's number one. Number two, it's really rare for an apparition to be able to learn to move things. The problem is more psychological, I think. That if a ghost showed up and like jumped in front of you or just appeared in front of you, you could freak out and you could get hurt. I even had a case where that happened in a family of four, where the ghost appeared. The father he was so shocked that he turned around and ran into the wall. This is what the wife described to me, which caused their kids, 3 and 4 years old, to start laughing. And she said the ghost looked mortified. So that kind of harm can happen. He actually, as he kind of came out of his daze, he immediately blamed the ghost for throwing him into the wall, which caused the kids to laugh even more. We have the ability to block pretty much anything, any of that stuff. And you don't have that ability with living people. I have been in a couple situations where I felt seriously threatened by the living, had nothing to do with the dead. So I would not worry about that. Ghosts do not carry guns and knives.
So we're better dead than alive, maybe. No, can't interpret it that way.
Sure. I don't really see, well, it seems like there can be people who are bullies in life who are still around after death. I haven't seen the malevolent, evil, anything other than some of the behavior of some of the ghost hunters.
So, okay, so you shouldn't be afraid of ghosts, but is there real evidence that houses can be haunted?
Depends on what you mean by real evidence. So yes, there is.
Well, I'm just repeating the question we got.
they want to know if I think it goes, if there's evidence you remember how you said there's some imprinting. So yeah. We have a haunted house. So there's this memory in the house. There's this imprintment on the house. Then people go in there. Do we pick up on this vibration, this perception, and feel this hauntedness?
Yes. I mean, there are even studies. There have been field experiments by Gertrude Schmeidler, Michelene Mayer, and George Hansen, based on a process that Gertrude Schmeidler came up with in the late 50s, bringing people into various houses, one of which was haunted, the others were not, and then having them map out on a floor map where they might have felt something. And overwhelmingly, this was the haunted places, the spots that the people living in those homes had reported things. I have done something similar on the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum, same kind of results. Out of the first one I did, 6 people all picked up, 5 out of the 6 picked up the spots that they had reports, consistent reports of activity. One of them picked up 0, nothing, either way. So, we say he's as psychic as a rock. So we have that kind of evidence. We have consistent patterns. We have hauntings where people have reported things. Were not aware of the history of their home whatsoever, but their description of what they were seeing related directly to, when you check the historical records or look through newspaper accounts or other things, they are describing what had happened in the location. So historically that had happened. So they are picking up information from that perspective.
So we have about 2 minutes left, Loyd.
Okay.
You got a ghost story for us?
In 2 minutes? I wish you had prepped me for this. I could have thought of one that was that short. I mean, I can tell you one. I have a short one that was related to me, if that's okay.
Well, what about your first ghost encounter? Can you do that in 2 minutes?
No.
Okay.
I don't
All
think
right.
so.
Pick what you want.
I mean, I can say, all right, I can say that the first case that I had that I really thought there was an apparition there. I can't tell the whole story because we don't have time. It is in Leslie Kean's book, Surviving Death, if you want to see the full explanation. But it was a family. It was 3 people living in the house, and the woman's mother moved into this house that had been empty for 1.5 years. They bought it in an estate sale. The previous owner died in the hospital of cancer. They bought the house. They bought antiques and all sorts of other stuff. 1.5 years into living in the house, their son told the mother that he knew that they were all seeing the ghost of the woman who used to live there, which they had. They had each individually been seeing this woman's ghost, usually on a once-a-week basis. Turned out the kid had been talking to the ghost every day, who then told them that they were also seeing the ghost once in a while and gave them enough information. And during our interview process, where apparently the ghost was present, the kid was acting almost like a medium, we got extensive information, family stories about this woman growing up in the house and her relatives, and information to track down the woman's only living relative, who had been hidden from the owners by the attorney for the estate. And I was able to talk to him. And as I told the story to him, each of the stories to him, he finished the stories. So the stories that were reported to me by the I guess the ghost, but through the boy, were stories that she knew he would know, which itself was pretty interesting. That's in a short form.
Well, thank you, Loyd. I put you on the spot there, but I know you have ghost stories stacked up all around you.
I do, but not 1 and 2 minute one.
Yeah.
We can do this though, during the conference, John. There'll be in the haunting rooms. Is this where we'll get Loyd to tell some more ghost stories under hauntings?
Sure.
You got to talk to him about it. You got to ask him.
Loyd, I like to ask you during the conference. We have a room named Hauntings. We'll invite you there. We'll have a few little ghost stories. Bring some marshmallows and hot chocolate.
Sounds good. Just don't make it too early in the morning because I'm on the West Coast.
I'm on the West Coast too, so
Okay,
we'll be good that way. We'll save it for later in the day. I'm with you on that. Loyd, I want to thank you very much for presenting today. Looking forward to you being part of the conference during that panel on that Friday. Remember, Loyd has lots of books, so if you found this interesting, check out his books. Also, his Facebook Live tomorrow, so you can watch that, interact with him.